Again, thank you for coming. Welcome to this session on money and education. The official title is Money, Schooling, and Educators, Creating a Critically Informed Movement for Monetary Reform and Eco-Justice. I'm Lucille Eckrich, and this is
Stephen Walsh.
And we are both educators in the state of Illinois. Stephen is a science curriculum development in Chicago Public Schools in the Chicago area, and I'm at Illinois State University in the College of Education there. And we, as well as 12 other people who have come to the Democracy Convention this time, are members of the American Monetary Institute, which is a 21-year-old nonprofit organization devoted to research on monetary history, theory, and reform in order to achieve economic justice and sustainability. And this is AMI's first time at the Democracy Convention. A few of our individual members have been here before, connected to other groups, but as an organization, this is our first time here. We had a couple sessions this morning, and we'll have two more tomorrow, one on money and the environment and one on kind of oppression and money and the roots of our money system and exploitation in our slavery system, and the abolition movement of slavery is kind of precursor to a need to abolish our existing money system and transform it. We're very happy to be here and to engage you in thinking about money, the nature of money, and how to transform it and why to transform it. So thank you for coming to this session. Stephen's going to take over for a minute.
Just to get a sense of us, who we are, how many people went to the sessions this morning on the planetary, with the monetary conversation going on? And how many people are familiar with the NEED Act?
With what?
The NEED Act?
NEED Act.
You know, a few, okay, on the sides there. Okay, we're just trying to get a sense of the group. How many people here are like teachers that have students in front of them? And how many of you are non-teachers who are educators but doing it more one-to-one rather than having students? How many of you have students in front of you? Anybody teachers?
I mean, we're in your jobs and you're not at this moment, but have been.
Okay, sorry.
I have been, right, yeah. Look at the gray hairs in the
And
room.
so, and the rest, all of us then pretty much are educating as adults one-to-one when we talk about money and monetary reforms. Okay, trying to get a sense of the group and how we would evolve things in that way. I'll just go over the agenda right now. We're going to talk about what is money, and then second, dependent on, or how we're dependent upon and stupefied about money. Where's the history and the causation, and how did that come about? And it was once upon a time we were well educated on money as a nation. What happened? 3, then we're going to deal with 3 education-related problems that derive from our flawed money system. So we'll talk about toxic loans by the Chicago Board of Education, then the rise of charter schools helping to defund public education in Chicago and elsewhere. And I'll do those 2, and Lucille will be back with student debt crisis. And then Lucille and I will both do AMI monetary reform and how it benefits education. And then we want to create, after that we'll have a bunch of time, and we want to create a dialogue and say, what is literacy? Or how do we talk to the next person about money? What are some of the hints? And, you know, like, I can tell you what I'm doing as a school teacher and what's going on with me, but then I want to hear your ideas, and so how we can talk to the next people, your union, your friends, etc., maybe a church where okay?
So we want to make clear at the outset that money itself is not the problem. Money was an incredible human invention. The problem, rather, is the particular way in which our ancestors institutionalized money in the modern era. We understand money to be an agreement between and among people to use it as a means of exchange. It is, Stephen would say, the lifeblood of society. That's what money is. It's a transaction lubricant for our exchanges. It emerged historically within human communities, many different communities in different places and times, and it became whatever custom or law in that community made receivable for payments, debts, and taxes within that territorial jurisdiction. It doesn't much matter what we use as money. All sorts of things have been used over time, from shells, stones, tally sticks, metal coins, paper notes, numbers in accounts, digits on a screen. Doesn't matter what we use, as long as its oneness and its quantity can be and are assured and managed by that sovereign authority or the lawful government, so as to maintain its purchasing power, which is to say the stability of prices over time within that community whose name that money bears. So as long as it's, I'll just continue. So that's what money has been at certain times in history, can be, and should be a public unit of account and medium of exchange. Our problem today is that money was gradually privatized over in the modern era, from starting about 500 years ago. But more seriously, the 300-year privatization process, it wasn't a given. It wasn't automatic. There were many fits and starts along the way. In fact, you may have heard earlier, the U.S. Revolutionary War and our Civil War were both fought with, in part, with a form of money that was public money that was spent into circulation to wage that war. First it was the Continentals in the 1770s, and then in the 1860s the Greenbacks, which continued for almost 100 years, but not completely. The problem each time was that it wasn't done system-wide, and it wasn't protected from abuse. And so once each war was over, private interests again won out. And that fascinating history, the 2,000-year history, and then the American history, is told in this big tome by Stephen Zarlenga, who was the founder of the American Monetary Institute. And it really also explains, and I think it's chapter 19, the political machinations that led to really the triumph of the bankers in 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed and our current system was signed into law by President Wilson. It was on December 23rd, just a couple hours after it passed, on a day that many of us were really focused on legislation passing on December 23rd. You know what I mean. So we were really focused otherwise at that time. The difference between public money, a public money system, as I described, as a public unit of account, a medium of exchange, spent into circulation by a government that regulates the quantity thereof in order to maintain the purchasing power of the money. The difference between that and a private system that we have is that the public money system entails a public unit of account called money, created and spent into circulation by a lawful government as needed to facilitate our commerce and well-being. That would make a lot of sense, right? We can have it. We can do that. We don't have that currently. That money that could be public money, if it ends up in a bank, which it will, banks have a purpose to play, and that is to provide the checking and savings and loan services for a price, for the cost of producing them. And so that price will revolve around the cost of producing them. And banks have to be good at that job in order to have the business come there. But that's not currently how our money system is, and that really is not currently how banks function, even though in the popular mind, we think banks function that way. In contrast, the private money system that we have is created by banks, by private banks, commercial banks, and lent into circulation whenever a borrower, like you or me, or a company, or my university, agrees to pay it back with interest. That is the moment in which that money is created. And so that private money serves the interests of the bankers at the expense of everyone else who uses it and the ecosystem that we all depend upon. And it does that at an exponential rate by kind of ironically causing scarcity every time the money supply increases, because only the principal is created, not the interest, and so you have to fight in the marketplace to earn, produce the value not only for the principal but for the interest as well. And at a macro level, there's not enough money unless more money is lent into circulation. And so it's an ongoing debt-based money system and debt-based crisis. The money is legal simply because it was legalized in 1913. It is arguably unconstitutional and definitely undemocratic, unjust, unnecessary, and unsustainable. While there are powerful interests that keep it in force, it largely persists because we let it persist. And we let it persist because we've become so dependent on it and yet ignorant about it. The dependency on it is built into the system. And that's kind of easy to understand. Once the government gave away in 1913 completely its power to create our money and its responsibility to monitor the value thereof, when it gave it away to the bankers, both we and our government became beholden to the bankers for our money. Money which is in short supply, no matter how massive its supply gets. The government, and it's massive because it's debt-based and interest-bearing, and that's why it's insufficient. Our dependency is greater than our government's because our government can also, they have to borrow everything they need unless they get it from us through taxes. And income taxes were instituted just around the same time as the Federal Reserve was put into place. Or they sell off their properties that they got to begin with by stealing it from the Native Americans, as we heard about last night from Chris, or borrowing it, like I said, and borrowing it from our future. But it's important, I think, for us to realize that not only we are dependent on the banks for our money, but our government is as well. How we became ignorant about money is, I think, less clear because it wasn't always the case. And if you know, many in the room know monetary history better than I do, but in the 1800s, money matters were widely and publicly discussed. They were addressed in public lecture circuits. Political parties that were multiple, not just two at that time, had money on their platforms. People understood it, people debated it. The North Dakota Bank, as you heard about, started in the very early 1900s. My own town of Bloomington, Illinois, had a greenback party in the 1860s through 1890s. The 8-hour day work struggle was fought many places through direct action, but one in Chicago. And that all was going on at the same time as mass secondary education was also instituted and created. And there really at that time was a curricular decision that was made that would stupefy students, pupils, about money matters. And I just want to briefly tell that story because it's significant, I think, for understanding why we've become ignorant. We weren't always ignorant. And so in 1892, the National Education Association, which already had started in 1857, it became really active in the late 80s, and it still exists today as one of the largest teacher unions. But in 1892, the NEA formed what was called the Committee of 10. And the Committee of 10 was an ad hoc national curriculum committee made up of 10 educational leaders. 6 of them were professors from universities, mostly private, Harvard, Yale, and 5 of them actually were already presidents of their universities. And then 4 were administrators of large prominent school districts, mostly urban ones. And one of them had just become the 4th Commissioner of Education for the United States. So these are the players who, as the Mass High School was beginning, were getting together to discuss what should the curriculum be. Its task was to consider and try to agree upon uniform requirements for college admission so as to lay out the purpose and courses of study for the growing numbers of high schools, graduates of which only a small minority would probably end up in college. And they were to establish this curriculum. They divided their work into 9 subcommittees, which they called conferences, one for each area of the curriculum. And it's kind of like this democracy convention is divided up into 8 conferences for different themes. And the Committee of 10 was divided up into 9 different conferences for the different areas of curriculum, and I could list them all, but it was Latin, it was Greek, it was English, modern languages was the 4th, then math, then it was the sciences of physics, chemistry, and astronomy, and then it was what was called natural history, then, which is interesting, botany, zoology, and physiology, understood as natural history, not simply science. And then the sciences of physical geography and geology and meteorology. Those were 8 of them. The 9th was the Conference on Social Sciences of History, Political Economy, and Civil Government. Each of these conferences was to meet actually physically together for 3 days, long before the internet, mail was even, probably on horseback somewhat still. But each of the members of the committee was to chair one of those conferences, and they met from December 28th to the 30th in 1892. The one on political economy and civil government and history met in Madison, Wisconsin, and they gathered together 10 other experts in each of the curriculum areas. So there were experts in those 3 together. One of the members of that committee was Woodrow Wilson, who was then a 36-year-old professor of history. And the author, Edward Krug, of the 2-volume set of History of American High School that I got the story from, he noted 2 proposals that Woodrow Wilson initiated during that conference. And one of them was, quote, that scientific history involving criticism and examination of evidence had no place in the schools, in the public high schools, for it tended to confuse young people. Scientific history, Wilson said, would just be college work and not high school work. Fortunately, that did not pass. And the way the conferences worked, there had to be unanimity for something to go forward. That initiative did not pass. But another resolution that he initiated did pass unanimously. And that was to exclude formal instruction in political economy in school programs. So at the time when the 8-hour workday had barely been won, When money was discussed widely, when the Russian and German revolutions were just happening, they're going to exclude political economy from the content of the public schools. And though that was buried in an academic text, it really jumped out at me as to help explain why generations of students now know nothing about money and know nothing about labor rights, socialism, Marxism, or a basic critique of capitalism. And so Americans, who some would say we kind of live in the belly of the beast, we've really been stupefied over a 100-year time period about money and the relations of production and exchange between and among us and with our ecosystem. And that that exclusion was proposed by somebody who not only went on to become the president of Princeton University, but also the president of the United States, and to sign the Federal Reserve Act into law seems rather remarkable and powerful to me. And I think it's kind of paved the way to internalized oppression and schooling for capitalist America, which is what our public school system, to some extent, has become. Teachers are powerful people. Teachers who understand education can and do otherwise. But at the formal curricular level, it's been explicitly denied, left out, and therefore early teachers didn't learn it. They didn't teach it to later new teachers, and it became a long period of stupefaction. So we're going to turn now to three problems, and we're probably taking too long, that really derive from the flawed money system we have that are education problems. And then we'll talk about how to solve it.
If it took a little long, it was good because it's a very important story about why did we have all of those parties in the late 1800s, greenback parties of progressive farmers, et cetera, all around with congressmen and everything. By the time of the Great Depression, we don't have people who can think about this or bring it up. It was just left to the great economists to come up with, and they thought they could carry the day with the other professors, and right was right, and we'll change the system. But the banking system went out, and the legislation was buried in Congress, and Zarlanga and all of us today are helping bringing it out again to where we got to go back and rethink this, because the public sector, for lack of money, is failing tremendously. And to go into that a little bit, I'm going to talk about education, and we're going to slightly shift gears, and we're going to come back to money, but we're going to talk about our present system. And okay, the banks won. The banks won. What are they doing with the power? And how are we feeling it today? And what does it mean for the banks to win? Well, let me give you a story. I could take this off. I'm a member of the Chicago Teachers Union. And also a member of CORE, its leadership group at the union. And I would study banking, because I've been part of AMI, and if I'm going to be a teacher, I might as well be useful for the union. So, toxic loans by the Chicago Board, and I have a reference there, and I have more than I'm going to be able to tell you. I'm going to tell you a quick story, but that's the reference. And there were two great reporters. They had to use the Freedom of Information Act to really fight and dig for this information. And it took them over a year to win contests in court to get the information out of the Chicago Board of Ed and the legal system. So what's going on there is in the 1990s, there's something called, in Chicago, it's called Renaissance 2010, and they want to build schools and they want to make education better for the kids. So we need money, we got to build buildings, and they took out a loan at a fixed rate of interest, $3 billion, a little more than that. By 2001, they got the president of the Board of Ed was a banker. He says, oh, let's do it the banking way. And by 2002, over $1 billion is now in a floating, comes about as a floating rate, like adjustable arm mortgage rate, right? And then they said, well, we're going to need more money to keep up things, and we'll adjust. We're going to do what's called auction rate borrowing. What they did is they made it 5,000 shares for. In this case, they were going to auction off $273 million in bonds, in bonds. And they put it into 100 shares. In the banks, there were like at least 5 of them. They got invited to purchase these shares as an investment, and then all the banks together would have a big bond purchase and be holding on to this Chicago Public School debt. And the bidding went like 2%. I'll take 2% interest, and the next some shares went out 2.25. I'm going to wait 2.5, and it turned out there wasn't enough bankers bidding on these shares, and they needed 5,000 of them to be purchased at the time. And what are we going to do? So the deal was, whoever bought the last share, say you finally get them all out, and the last one's like 4 or 5%. All of the shares that came previously, the interest rate for all 5,000 shares, whatever the total number was, I think it was 5. I'd have to look at it. I don't need to do that now. Is 5%. So if you started the bidding at 2%, your share now is worth 5%. There's also a stipulation. By the way, the law firm that handled this and worked on this also wrote the law in Springfield, Illinois. And so they should be a little bit implicated in this. So what happened then is, if there was not enough bank bidders, there's the information for you. If there was not enough bidders, you would then go to state law to decide what the interest rate was. In Illinois, that was 9%. 9%. Guess what? The banks knew at least 3, 4, 5 months that this market, this whole scheme was becoming fraudulent because there were not enough bidders. But they went ahead with it anyhow. And guess what? There wasn't enough banks bidding on it, and the thing collapsed. It went to 9%. So banks can go to the discount window and borrow, before the collapse at 2, 3, 4%, and then after, 0.25 or a quarter of an interest point. Now they're making 9%. What does that mean for the kids? What does it mean for having to pay back? And back in the 90s when they started, it was 3.5. Now they're going to pay 9%.
Back in the day, it was adjustable, and now it's locked in.
Yes. Well, let me go. Yes, Paul.
Just explain the discount window.
Oh, the discount window, it actually is what the Federal Reserve will lend to banks at a very small interest rate. It's the lender of last resort, and it'll always be happy to lend to banks in times of need. And before that interest rate actually takes effect, there's something called the federal loans interest rate, and the banks will end up loaning to each other at the end of the day to make sure their books balance out, and they do it even a little cheaper. And in London, they do the same thing. It's called the LIBOR rate. But when you get to that, this actually gets more complicated and sophisticated. So but that ends one story there. Okay, we got it? 9%, that's what we've got to do in Chicago to pay back the interest rates. It was around 2007 to 2009. And more and more money was going into this category. We had a banker as the president of the Chicago Board of Ed. Okay, the next piece on the toxic loans was interest rate swaps. Briefly, I'm paying that fixed rate, and then we make a deal. You're the bankers, and I'm not. So I'll pay my 3.5% interest to you, or 5% interest to you, the bankers, and then you're going to pay me back the LIBOR rate. And they didn't even do the federal or the discount window rate. They went to the LIBOR rate in London. And so I would collect back. I would pay this interest rate, and you would pay the interest rate that LIBOR. So it's called an interest rate swap. It's just a banker's casino gambling game. They lost another ton of money on this. And then when they went back then to go back to their fees and to get back into more of a fixed rate, as the interest rates fell from 2008, 2012, they went back to fixed rates, but they had to pay penalties and fees. And I know they were over $70 million just in penalties and fees. And this is the money that's being taken out of education, right? Public education. What are we going to do? Just 2-3 days ago, parents and children outside of Chicago public schools are upset because Rauner, just several days ago, won't pass the budget. And it's taken away the hundreds of millions of dollars from Chicago schools. And they're out there fighting. And Chicago public schools right now has to go back to the bankers, borrow more money to open up in September. And they can't afford, those interest rates are going to kill them. And the parents know it, and so they're going against the banks because of high interest rates. You know, it's, for us in Chicago, it's a serious problem. So that's, the bankers in their system are taking over. As of 3 years ago, the debt had accumulated to $5 billion of principal and another $5 billion in interest. So we're at $10 billion, and that was 3 years ago, and it's gone up since then. I don't have the most recent figures, but it's a serious situation.
You need to move on.
Okay, charter schools defunding public education. We started out, Chicago ended up led the nation in charter schools, and in about '96 we were allowed to have 15 charter schools in Chicago, 15 in the state. The state elsewhere in Illinois didn't want them, but Chicago took them all. And the teachers union, which I was a part of, and even including its leadership, I would say, no, we could try it. No, we have 696 schools, public schools. If there's 15 schools and they want to experiment, maybe bringing in French or, South Korean language and culture in this school, go for it. Let's go for it. We're not going to criticize. We'll just see how it turns out. By almost every year thereafter, the number increases. To 2009, it's around 140 charter schools in Chicago. And No Child Left Behind, the first president, George W. Bush, in 2001 makes a deal with Kennedy, and we have No Child Left Behind, which brings the corporatization of after-school programs. It allows the corporations to say, oh, what can we do? How can we make some money here providing services after school? But they were gathering their information, and Sylvan and a whole bunch of them ended up, and others taking control of schools afterwards in the charter school. They're learning how to come into the public education arena. Several years ago, budget-wise, paying off the banks, in Chicago we closed 50 schools. We fought, and these are poor schools, and they're pushing more and more kids into the classroom. I can go through, Chicago has an 80, we used to have a gym once a day, you'd have to have so many minutes of exercise. We got a state bypass from the Illinois State Board of Ed. We only have to do education 1 day a week now, so we got rid of 80%. And we chopped off over half of the gym teachers. Art and music, we got a budget crunch. The school can have art or music, but not both. Pick one. It went on, teachers' aides. Other things got crushed and crushed because of financial concerns. And it hasn't changed to this day, it's getting worse. So 50 schools closed. 3 days later, they knew there was a problem. But AUSL, one of the owner of that is one of the biggest donors to our mayor in Chicago. And so, oh, we're gonna start 25 new charter schools. That was the plan, get rid of 50 public, and they allocated 25. They couldn't get those 25 up and running, but within about 7-8 months, they did get 7 or 8 of those schools up and running. You know, there's a lot of politics flying back and forth. The union started getting strong. The charters were suffering tremendously. There's horror stories that teachers would tell other teachers about what was going on in some of these charter schools. It was a failed experiment. In the charters who were there, they became more unionized. So charters now in Chicago, many of them are opting and are now joining the Chicago Teachers Union, and we're fighting a battle there. So that's where we are at with privatization and the corporatization and the banks getting involved with public education. There's a wonderful DVD out in Colorado, another place, it's called education.inc. And there is a story, and ALEC, you know, the group writing laws are part and parcel of having this go across the nation. Okay, sorry.
What is ALS? It's
ALEC, it's the...
No, I know ALEC. AUSL.
Oh,
I don't know that.
that's the Urban School Leadership.
It's
American Urban School Leadership.
Like charter
And
school?
it's a charter school in Chicago. It's the largest one in Chicago.
Thank you.
And if you want more information on it, the Tribune reporters, Republican newspaper, but they did a darn good job. My hats are out to them. You know, and I tell them so too. Okay.
So I'm going to try to be very brief because I want to move on to actually the NEED Act and then our discussion. So around student debt, I would just say that when I already said before, when our government gave away its power to create our money, it too was beholden to the bankers. And after World War II, I mean, there was the GI Bill, and that did involve some grants, although it was preceded by a 2-year loan program for veterans going into science and medicine. So even with veterans, it started with loans. But there was a grant. We were victors in the World War II. We dominated the international economy, the agreements that happened after World War II in the mid-50s, the Bretton Woods Agreement. But regardless of us winning that and being dominant, when the federal government with civil rights laws and with a lot of latent potential in the people and in the economy after the war, it still did not have the means to issue grants because it had gave away its power to create money. And so when the federal government got into higher ed funding, it started with the loan program. And that was the National Defense Education Act, the NDEA, in 1958. And even that, the government lent the money, and it was low interest loans, 3% to student. It actually paid, the money went to the universities and colleges, which had to match it $1 to every $9 that it got from the federal government. And then it accepted the students and it provided the loan. And the students paid back the university, and the university paid back the $9 to the government. But even that loan scheme was not affordable for the federal government. There were too many students that actually wanted to go to higher education and were tapping into it, and it did not have the means to even do that, even though it was earning interest on those loans. And so in '65, it had the first Higher Education Act, and that did inaugurate some scholarships for low-income students and work study. but its most significant feature was changing the way that federal dollars, the role it would play in student loans. And so instead of the government using its monies to loan, it didn't have enough. It used its money to make it more lucrative for the banks to issue the loans to the students by allowing the interest rate to double. And so the private sector banks could charge 6% of interest on their loans. The government would cover 3%, and so the student still only had to pay the 3% while they were in school. And people who were above a certain income level, when they got out of school, they had to pay the full 6%. And so this enabled the government to be able to afford more loans. It spread out the money by using its money that way. It also was very much in the interest of the bankers to have this student loan process start at an income that they could make something on, but very quickly, the same year that we came off the gold standard, when Nixon took us off that, they created Sallie Mae. And even before that point, every point that the interest rates went higher in the commercial market, there was then pressure on the legislators to raise the interest rate, and that happened. But Sallie Mae then was created in '72, and that was this government enterprise, a quasi-governmental organization that would buy back from the banks the loans that they had issued and then repackage them and issue them as sort of long-term debts, the same stuff that's gone on with mortgages, as we know more recently. And that process, stimulated the bankers earning from the student debt process. And, the public, the only means we have for our money, all the money in the macro level economy comes into it through debt, at least 97-98% of it. And so the public doesn't, if they don't come from a family with means to pay for college, they too have to borrow it out. So let me stop there. There's a lot more I think I could go into, but we should move on.
Yeah. I'm going to briefly talk about AMI monetary reform and then benefiting and how that would benefit educators. But basically, we've described up to this point is a system where we've lost control of the money early in the 20th and prior to that, after the greenbacks declined. And the bankers and the privatization, the banks really take over and gain strength during the 20th century. And we have what we have now, what I would consider and how we've described to you a pretty failed system. How are we going to recover? So in the NEED Act, we have three, you may have heard of it, but there's three key elements for monetary reform, we believe. And you can put them in any act, and they were suggested in the 1930s by Irving Fisher, Henry Simons, a number of mini-grade economists, and if you're there this morning, it was like endorsed by 200 and some, and 100 gave tacit approval, but it was that we had to change the three key elements to write our system, and it's also been called the elegant solution. Let me give it to you. One, you have to nationalize the Fed. It has to become a public institution, not a bank membership institution. It has to be at the interest. Like Bank of England is owned by the public. Right at the end of World War II, they could see that it wasn't serving the people, it had to serve the nation better. The Archbishop in England said, it can't go on this way. And right after World War II, they nationalized the Bank of England. We never did that. And it serves the interest, not of Main Street or Side Street. It really serves the interest of the bankers. I wish we thought it might have been a little bit better in my research. It wasn't. It's not good. But anyhow, monetary reform, we have to make that a public institution. Two, we have to stop what's called bank-created money. About 97% of our money in the United States is created. It's flexible because every year the Fed gives after all of its expenses and its dealings and paying out its membership, 6% membership fees on their membership money that they put in. What's left, they give a small amount of money back to the federal government. But the whole system of banks creating that amount of money has to stop. And what they do is they have deposits come in, and all deposits here, guess what? Those deposits stay there. They then get to, whatever, they add that up and they get to create 90%. And this is the multiplier, and this is even old-fashioned accounting. Now they don't even care about the multiplier because they'll do what I call forward accounting. They'll just go and create reserves as they create new money. And if they need more money at the end of the day, they just borrow it from each other. And if you look at banks borrowing from each other, from 1961 it was near zero. Now it's in banks, 15-20% of banks' liabilities are money they've borrowed. Okay, so we need to stop that process of banks creating money. And what has to happen is they have to actually lend out people's money here who want to take some risk and make a gamble of it. Maybe low interest on mortgages or high interest they don't mind gambling, they can go on gamble on credit cards. But the depositors have to have skin in the game. Okay, so we've got to rethink our responsibilities going into the future. Banks can be intermediaries, but they cannot be issuers and creators of money. That needs to be the federal government or a public institution, like the Federal Reserve, but a public one working in our best interest. And one of the ways I like to look at it is newly issued money, you should often think of it as like Social Security money for the proper good. Once it's in circulation, then it's the market. It's the free market system. You can think of it as socialism, communism here, whatever you want, but it's in its market system, it's capitalism here. There's some compatibility there. I offer you that thought to think about. The third thing is, if you stop banks putting money into circulation, you're then left to having to put money into circulation some other ways, and then the government does it. And the government can do it in lots of different ways. In the NEED Act, they create a whole bunch of money, 25% goes straight to the states. There would be what's called the dividend. Every citizen would get some money. It would help kickstart the economy. It's not a Christmas tree program, but you can create a situation where everybody who wants a job, you can have full employment. You can change the dynamics. You can make a steady state economy this way. You don't have to be squeezing the system, private employees, and the whole public system, which is being squeezed right now. You don't have to. We don't have to have it. There can be a sense of humanity. And the benefits of this, and I'm going to now talk to you as a teacher of lots and lots of kids. I see a number of benefits. One is, if I can think of my children in the classroom, my students, and I say, now there's a place for every one of you as you grow up. As a matter of fact, when you go back to your communities today, your parents are going to have jobs and they're going to feel good about themselves. Your community is safer. It makes me feel good. Now I go to the south side of Chicago and I teach them, I speak Spanish, so I teach in some of the poor neighborhoods. I feel better about going into the neighborhood. I have a sense of hope for the future then. And when the whole community's doing well, we're all doing well. We can think about it. I'm feeling good. I was an environmental science teacher. I'm feeling good about the birds and the bees. Because we can then invest in our futures and be positive. So that's my spiel.
Okay. So I hope you caught those three pillars. But just to reiterate that, it's that the first brings the money creation process and monitoring process into the federal government where it belongs. And then all new money will be created as money, not as interest-bearing debt as currently happens. And it will be democratically spent into circulation to promote the general welfare and public good, and monitored to not be inflationary or deflationary. So that's the bringing the Fed into the government and halting the bank's privilege, legal privilege, currently to create our money. That's the second part of it. Banks still have a role, but their role then is with real money, with publicly created money. That's what is in checking accounts or transaction accounts and savings and loans accounts. And you pay for those services that banks provide. And then thirdly, it's the government spending money into circulation, creating it, originating new money in accord with democratic budgetary processes. And that's how money enters the circulation through federal, state, municipal governments. New money is issued then. It goes into the economy through all the work of schools and building roads and garbage collection and all the things that public monies currently support. And so those are the three parts. What I wanted to also add is just in terms of student loans, then the government has the means, actually, if that's something the public wants, to support public education at public universities. It can decide to do that, as many other countries actually already managed to do. And in terms of student debt, current student debtors, decisions can be made to discount that debt, to lower the interest rate, or to reduce the payments over time, so that current people who are in this transition period, who currently owe $20,000, $30,000, the current average is, I think, $32,000 per year is owed on average by every college student. But some people owe upwards of over $100,000, $150,000 if they've gone on for a doctorate. There are already proposals for a free 2-year college option. That's already been issued. Sarah Goldrick-Robb you can look that up. And it's quite controversial currently because I think I mentioned in a previous session, that money would, the means to do that in our current system in the proposal would actually disallow that money to go to private universities and institutions. And something I didn't say, from the get-go, our loan scheme went to public and privates, and that was being subsidized by the government. All the private universities, which are not-for-profit organizations, the big Ivy Leagues have endowments that are not taxed. There was an issue in Connecticut to actually force that to be taxed. Those big Ivy Leagues are now giving a ton more money to their students, building the next generation of elites who will donate to their university. So there are a lot of issues there, and the public universities, they were forced to get in the game too of creating endowments. My own public university in Illinois in the 1980s started to build an endowment. So it has, investments now that make it feel like I want to maintain this system while that system is biting it in the you-know-what. So anyhow, I think there is means of loan forgiveness and of future student higher education that would be very possible with the NEED Act. So we have barely 20 minutes left. 17, 18 minutes left. And we wanted to actually
not only have your questions, but also to have your ideas on how to communicate, or what we might say when we meet a friend, or we meet students if you're retired teachers. And what we're looking for right now is there's a little bit of information in K-12 curriculum saying, I should learn how to save. There's junior achievement, how I can start a business in 4th, 5th grade, a lemonade stand, or raise chickens or there's, but what, we also teach our students greed. In 6th grade, I can teach them the stock market game, and I get promoted. The Fed will help support it. Illinois Economics Council, and there's one in every state, helps support it, where I teach kids how to go into the market and how to get greedy. Coming into the system, at 4 years old, they have a strong sense of fairness in the playground, and they're extremely creative. By 3rd grade, when I teach math, they're often learning the way, this is the standard way to solve the problem. Standard way to solve the problem. It's being a loss of creativity. 6th grade, how do we take care of money? What do you do with money? By teaching just how to buy shoe companies and McDonald's in the stock market game, and how to go on margin, I'm teaching them how to go into our debt system and how to get greedy and forget about the fairness. It's all about making money. I asked them then questions like, right, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do with it? And I'll have them work on some essays. And, oh, yeah, it's nice to have money for my family and friends, but I also want them across the street to have insurance, or everyone else to be able to go to the hospital. They haven't lost that sense of fairness, or that outreach that they naturally have. They're bonding. What do we need to tell our children? What should be our curriculum? And if you were teachers, I'd be asking, kindergarten, there's got to be something, what's our message there? What should be a proper, and it doesn't matter for Democrats, Republicans, Greens, Libertarians, etc., and atheists, whatever. What does our curriculum look like? Christian-based, whatever. What does our curriculum look like? And so, what are your ideas? And then in this group, how do we talk to the next person? How do you talk to your church member, your union member? What are some of are any of you beginning this conversation or thinking about your children, grandchildren? How do we want to get them to think about money so they can understand money in society? Sometimes I'll tell parents, I want our children, your children, to be able to think like central bankers. That makes them feel good. They can be up there and smart and know it and be sure of themselves. But I want everyone to have that. And I want it to be understandable for them. So, thoughts, comments?
Somewhere along the line, I think you promised to tell us what the NEED Act was. Did
Yeah.
you do that?
Yeah, the NEED Act, those.
That was the 3 pieces that we reiterated
Oh, okay.
of bringing the Federal Reserve Bank into the government.
Yeah.
It's not currently, maybe Howard wants to address it, but that's the first piece, is making the Federal Reserve
Yes.
a national entity. The monetary authority some people would call it a 4th branch of government.
What exactly does that mean? Our tax money goes into it? Yeah, it means that we
The
don't
money,
it ourselves?
means money creation is done by the government instead of by the banks.
That's all.
Yes.
No,
No.
no.
Okay, Howard.
So that's the 3 essential front-end main reforms of the NEED Act, right? And then there's this long list of social spending that it's gonna do. It's gonna fund
That's
healthcare,
the third
education, it's gonna rebuild the infrastructure, it provides a citizen's dividend. Because we need a lot of money to run an economy. There's not enough money, we've already noticed there's not enough money. I don't think any of us could say we have too much money in our pocket. But we should have enough to do everything we want to do. And if we do it through a public money system, it provides that because it changes the whole dynamic.
Is that good?
Pretty good. I always thought the Federal Reserve was nationally owned, that was part of our government.
We appoint the president appoints some of the governors and the chairman. But other than that, the system is run.
All
As
the
an-
banks
as
that
an
comprise
independent-
it
Yeah,
are
all the banks.
private, they're private shareholders of those banks, and they all have private commercial banks in their regions. But the history of the banks that became part of the Federal Reserve System, they were private banks, and they became part of that. They were given the authority and the name of a Federal Reserve System, but they are not part of the government. Only the leaders. And so the second piece is to end this privilege that was legalized for the banks to create money through lending it into circulation. That's a part two. And the part three is then the government is originating new money to pay off previous debts as they come due, is partly, there's a whole sort of transition period, and to create the means of exchange, the transaction lubricant for the economy, spending it into circulation through the government into the economy.
With one aim of having full employment. Paul had a question.
Well, just a question and a comment. I would recommend people Google the NEED Act, or it's HB 2990. It's very readable, it's very instructional, it's relatively short, and it's
It's HR,
HR.
Sorry?
House of Representatives.
Yes.
Right, and it's
We still have that.
2001. I mean, if you Google it, there is something more recent that's a different name. But it's the National Employment
Emergency
Employment
Protection.
Defense Act. National Emergency Employment Defense Act.
I happen to have a 32-page summary and explain. Ann's going to get a first special copy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll do some good with it.
Okay. Thoughts on
Howard.
curriculum? Thoughts on
Howard
speaking
wanted
to
to
somebody?
clarify something.
I just wanted to address her question about the Federal Reserve. Remember back at the late 19th century, we had a lot of people who knew about money. And so we had to so the bankers kind of had to fool the population to get a private central bank.
Right.
And that's what the Fed's about.
Yeah, and Lucille described that very well about Woodrow Wilson and the Committee of
Right.
10 and taking political economy out of it, out of the curriculum.
Right.
Okay,
Well, all we get today is consumer economics. If you get something, that's, unless you have a thoughtful critical history or, social science teacher, you get consumer economics. We know we're supposed to be good consumers because the whole thing falls apart if we don't consume, which we could stop shopping, and
Yeah.
that would go a long way to making the changes
Let's
we
listen
need.
to
That
this.
should be part of the strategy.
So if you said it's gonna be publicly owned and run by the government, well, is that the executive branch, is that the legislative branch? And if you think about what's gone on,
It's,
well, a lot of these, let's say it's a legislative branch. Well, a lot of these people are creatures of corporations, and they would do things which are, maybe.
right, you have,
it's
there's a-
entirely separate from.
yeah, but there's a good government, you have to have good government. The Constitution says Congress, Article 1, Section 10 says Congress shall create the money. What it is you can have a public administration creating the money and saying how much can be created, and congressmen can be arguing, pork belly, this is what my district needs, this is what my district needs. And you give them the monetary authority, much like the Federal Reserve today, decides how much money can go in. And I work with students, so I tell students, do you want to aim for a model, do you want 0% inflation or 2% inflation? So you work that out, and you model this, and you have your students work on it.
So say representatives who are elected would make these appeals, but who are the people who are gonna be making these decisions? How do they land in that spot?
It's the executive branch.
It's really a
It's,
fourth branch of government, a
Yeah.
monetary authority whose job is all of the session this morning, Jamie talked about the data is there about the economy. And they would be the entity that understands the,
So there'd be.
Go ahead.
So it would be a
Howard, John.
revised, a
John,
revised
go
Federal Reserve System that's publicly owned, but it's quasi-independent still, so that there's some distance between them and the legislature. And they have different, they have to learn to get along, but they have different charters, so to speak. And-
John.
What- You know, when the Federal Reserve was set up, one of the things that the bankers wanted to do in setting up the Federal Reserve was to make it as independent as possible from the legislative or the executive authority. And so gave them a great deal of independence, even though the Board of Governors are in fact appointed, by the standard mechanisms. When the writers of the NEED Act were thinking about this monetary authority to decide how much new money to create each year, they wanted to have it as separate, as a fourth branch of government. But in order to do that, it would have required a constitutional amendment, a new branch of government. So what they settled for was something perhaps was second best, by putting it in the Treasury Department. But the way the NEED Act is written makes it very explicit that the monetary authority has its own independence in making the judgment as to how much new money to create each year in accordance with the kind of data that they get through the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve System now is incorporated in the Treasury Department, and at the service of the monetary authority, which can in fact decide how much new money it's appropriate to create each year.
Thoughts, ideas?
One thing I learned is that this idea of keeping it independent, the government, or the president cannot fire the Federal Reserve Chairman. She's
Okay.
in for not
Janet Yellen.
9-year term. Does it change in any way the rules of how the Federal Reserve is
No, yeah, it would keep that the same.
that
And
independence?
And yes, and down to even what their salaries would be, it'd be fairly comparable, actually, to what the Federal Reserve.
It just
will
takes
actually-
the banks out of
the money
the
creation.
ones that get the
It takes the banks,
profits.
yeah, it takes the banks out of having ownership and membership in this group, and it makes it a public institution. And so the people working in it have expertise in the area, but they're not working for bankers who are the owners of it, but they're working for the public, it's a national organization.
It also changes that the nature of money is, it's real money, it's a government asset, it's a
Rather
public
than a
asset rather
Right,
than
right,
a debt,
that's how
and
come
rather
we're
than
always
an
saying positive
interest-bearing
money
debt.
reform, to distinguish, make that distinguish between banks loaning money into existence, debt-based money, versus the government often spending, they can loan money into existence through a loan into banks if needed. But they'll be also spending maybe a great deal of money into circulation.
Are there any questions? Maybe one way to use the last 5 minutes is to ask the other AMI members who are here just to say who you are and how you got involved and how you educate, whomever you educate on money. How do you do it in 1 minute, because there are more than 5 of
30
you.
seconds, Silver, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Sue Peters, I've been a member of the AMI, and I educate people. One is I'm a member of the Green Party, and 4 of the Greens from around the country, we meet every week on Skype, and we built a website called greensformonetaryreform.org, which explains the NEED Act, explains the problem, the solution that the AMI has, and it's done for beginners. So I would recommend that, and it's almost complete. We've been worked on it for 1.5 years, and we've built it so that beginners who don't know anything about money would understand the monetary reform, because the NEED Act is part of the Green Party national platform, but the Green Party really doesn't know that. So that's why we.
Not very many of us.
Not very many. That's how I educate.
And Well, I just talk about it all the time. And, you know, whenever I meet someone, I try to listen to what their problems are and then kind of just educate about money a little bit. But one of the most exciting things to me about the NEED Act is the fact that when we change from an economy where money is issued as debt for personal gain to a system where money is issued for the general welfare publicly as an asset, that changes the paradigm from economics of greed to an economics of care. And when you change to an economics of care, that has tremendous psychological impacts because right now we have tremendous psychological impacts from money as debt. Because that's basically usury. And there's a tremendous amount of psychological impacts on that that we don't even notice because it's so subliminal.
Our experience of time is incredibly quantified. There are aspects of time that are qualitative that we have little glimpse of that this would change. Jerry?
Geraldine Perry, the way I try to spread the word about monetary reform, I write. I post articles like on Dissident Voice and other venues like that. I submit them to some magazines. I'm also interested in agriculture, so I try to unite the two a lot of times. I sometimes talk to my village board and city councilman and the mayor. I sometimes come prepared with a flyer or a handout and give to them. What else do? I talk to people. I try just about, as many
Write
methods
books.
as I can.
You wrote
I wrote,
Two Faces of Money.
That's right. I wrote 2 books, Two Faces. I've got 3 websites. TwoFacesOfMoney.com, which has got the TwoFacesOfMoney.com has a lot of additional information, and there's some slide presentations that are money related. The encroaching economic police state is one example, and I've rewritten some of the web page before you get to the link for the slide presentation.
Let's get to, we're almost out.
Okay.
Joe, go
Sorry.
ahead. Well, how do you?
Joe,
You heard
John.
your thing. I said Joe first.
Yeah, well, I mean, my problem probably is that I spend most of my time, talking about and engaging. Actually, that is kind of how I consider it. It is engaging, because there's so little real knowledge out there about money. It's like as if it's been systemically, held down, and just so. However, it's like Sue said. It's just like Howard said. People have their own thing that's going on. Inevitably, it concerns something about having access to money in order to solve their problems.
Right.
And in a debt-based money system, just like fixing the climate, in a debt-based money system, it will never happen. It has to meet somebody's investment return. Requirements in order to do that. So you have to have money without that, and so that's why I use it.
Excellent.
John?
Oh,
You've done a lot, so I want to hear from John. I know we're going over a minute or two, and then Paul. But
well, I've given talks at both Unitarian gatherings and Quaker gatherings over the last 3 years. I've given talks to 2 Democratic Central Committees in 2 counties in Ohio, and I may have one almost ready to make an endorsement of the NEED Act to make a recommendation to the state committee. So, and we've interacted with people at the university to get young people involved, and I got a woman who teaches a class on how to make videos for community organizations, and she made the class. Then a group in the class made made several videos for our group, Democracy Over Corporations, and one of them was about the student textbook costs that you were talking about earlier. So I've got a little video on that I have to show you sometime. But so those are some of the kind of activities that I've been involved with.
Okay, Paul.
Okay, yeah, this is more on a personal level. I'm kind of new to this, and I've kind of been a closet progressive all my life, and I say that because I was always embarrassed by the question, how are you going to pay for all this? And I discovered that there actually is a way to do that, and we have the power to do that. I can come out of the closet now.
All right.
And I have a really good, solid answer, and it's very, very freeing, a very liberating feeling.
Oh, right here.
Go ahead.
Just an immediate follow-up on that. I mean, I've always felt the answer is pretty obvious. Most wealth in the world is the result of a great crime and it needs to be redistributed. But this, like, you can use monetary policy as one of the ways to redistribute wealth that's, a lot less potentially violent than some of the other ways. So I feel it's same as your answer.
Yeah, no.
Are there any governments in the world that are close to what would happen if we did the need?
Yes, I would say Iceland is looking very seriously, so I was going to write down the International Movement for Monetary Reform. If you look up that website, it will give you a list of about 24 countries that are working on this. And Iceland, because it had a crash and it wasn't part of the euro, it did not bail out at banks, people went to jail. They are discussing it, working on it, informed by many people involved in the monetary reform.
So would you write that on?
Yeah, this is AMI's official website, so it's just monetary.org. And I'm working on a website that I'm aiming for teachers and students. And if you went to this and if you got the tweets and underneath it, you could find it. I've got fifth graders who talk about, what would Ben say? And it's Ben Franklin, he gets hit by lightning. But did you know he popped and fell down? And he woke up and he was in 2014 and he was with my students. So there's a long dialogue, a 25-minute dialogue between him and my students. And it was a summer project and I needed to play one of the characters. You'll know it when you hit it.
Maybe one last.
Very, very quick question, provocation. So yeah, the fact that Iceland had a different experience than like Greece is a really important thing to point out, and I think it's important for us to go back to Jane Jacobs and her point that like city regions are actually the economic unit, and that them being able to set their own monetary policy is important. And in that regard, alternative currencies, and in that regard, it's really hard to experiment with a currency when you're an actual city or country or something like that. But we can try out some of these theories with cryptocurrencies. So I'm just curious if anyone is connected to, Bitcoin is the least interesting thing ever. It's reincarnating gold in digital form with all the environmental destruction of actual literal mining. But there's a lot of much cooler cryptocurrencies that you could try out monetary policy with. And I'm wondering if anyone's connected with any of those communities.
So in the Netherlands, the monetary reform movement there is they are looking at really the transition period, how it plays out in the 15 years after a reform would happen, and their understanding of the money then will be entirely electronic. So they're working on that.
Is that Unskilled?
Unskilled is the website, but it's in Dutch. They're very, and the only parts relate to AMI, then there's a little bit in English, but Unskilled. But I would recommend Sovereign Money is a website of Joseph Huber, who has presented at AMI numerous times, a great sociologist. But he has a book by that title. It's a 2017 publication, very good, serious read, but accessible if you give it time. But he has a website that's in English. And he is of the perspective that I am. I don't speak for AMI on this, but that it's not either or in terms of local and regional currencies and national currencies, state bank and national, but both end, with the caveat that if you don't change the macro system, the national system, you leave that in place, the other things help that to survive yet another day and do its damage further. So, and Joseph Huber would agree with that having national level change might make less need for state and local and regional banks, but doesn't preclude the need for them because of differences in the level of development in different places. And it allows you to really develop internally, to have local economies. And I have a whole scheme for us, the state of Illinois, and bailing it out of debt through a currency that would be spent into circulation through the public school system. And if anybody's interested in that, I'd be happy to talk with you. But I think we're out of time.
I just have an announcement.
Yeah.
It's not in the schedule, but tonight at 7:30 in Willits, in the main room, 125, there's a talent show with music and skits, and everybody's welcome, starting at 7:30. And if you want to sing something, please come. If you have something you want to act, okay?
And where is that?
It's in Willits in the
Willie Hall.
125, which is the main room we were in last night.
The other announcements, just there are 2 more sessions. Howard is leading one tomorrow on climate change and money at 2:30. And before that, the new abolitionism movement is by Reverend Delman Coates, and understanding sort of, the abolition of slavery, the abolition of private interest-driven debt-based money is what we need to work on now. Because we're all slaves without that. And as we heard an earlier presenter, there are an increasing number of slaves today internationally. So I would recommend those.
He's a great speaker.
Yeah, he's a great speaker. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.